Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Justin with NRN, the No Bull Racing Network, and oh my goodness, what a weekend of racing. Everyone was racing somewhere in some part of the world at some time this weekend. So we have lots to get to, and yes, this recap is not coming to you on a Sunday because the NASCAR race was postponed again due to weather. That makes the second time this season, so we find ourselves here again on a Monday. The weather has just not been cooperating with NASCAR at all this year, it seems. It's just been the strangest bit of weather we've had to start the 2018 season. But let's start with the biggest surprise of the weekend, and that would be the Formula One race in China. So Ferrari is continuing to show lots of pace, and Sebastian Vettel would once again grab the pole over his Ferrari teammate Kimi Räikkönen. And you'd have to go all the way back to fourth place to find Lewis Hamilton. But Ferrari, they are serious about winning the championship this season. And Mercedes has still yet to win in 2018, and I don't think Mercedes is used to this. I don't think they really know what to do. They're so used to showing up to the track, unloading their car, and watching Hamilton win with really no contest whatsoever. And now they're all flustered. They're not the only big dog on campus anymore. They're having to think about this for once. They're having to race their car against another team for once. They're actually having to race. And Ferrari has finally got the pace that Mercedes has. This isn't just some fluke like many probably thought it was at the start of the season. Ferrari is here to play. But it was a clean start to the race. Vettel would get out front and start leading laps with Bottas behind him, and he was giving chase. Mad Max Verstappen would, to no one's surprise, make some crazy moves off the start to get himself up to fourth, and Hamilton would be stuck back in fifth, just trying to keep up with the leaders. He couldn't match the pace. But Bottas was hanging in there just about 2 to 3 seconds back and couldn't reel in race leader Vettel. However, when you can't pass him on the track, you pass him in the pits. And that's what Bottas did. Bottas pitted first, so when Vettel had completed his stop and rejoined the race, he was looking at the back end of a Mercedes. This was all on lap 27, and it was some fantastic racing up at the front. The first part of the race was, well, I'm going to be honest, it was boring. But the second half of the race was just awesome. That was some good Formula One. Bottas had both Ferraris on either side of him, and he held off both of them. He held off both and Räikkönen. Räikkönen would get around his teammate Vettel for second, and our pole sitter would drop back to third. But that was only for a moment, because Vettel would then find his footing again, and he'd get back around Räikkönen, but he still couldn't pass Bottas. So for the first time in 2018, it looked like Bottas was going to pick up the first win for Mercedes. But that's when the safety car was deployed and changed the whole game. The golden rule of motorsport is don't wreck your teammate. But after coming off an emotional high in Bahrain with Toro Rosso scoring points, they were not going to be celebrating after China. When both cars came together and crashed, Hartley shut the door on Gasly in the hairpin, and that would bring out the safety car. Now, Daniel Ricciardo hadn't had the best weekend in China. He had more reliability issues, and that had hurt his qualifying spot, and you just didn't see him being much of a factor. Red Bull hadn't really been a factor in the practices or the qualifying sessions, and with, like I said, Ricciardo having reliability issues in China, as well as last weekend during the race in Bahrain, he just wasn't on the radar. Throughout the first part of the race, he wasn't even that strong, running around in 6th position. But during the safety car, Red Bull would jump into the pits for the softer tire, and that was going to give them an advantage over the guys up front on the older, harder compound. Lap 35, we went back to racing, and Bottas was in the lead, but Ricciardo was charging. He'd get up past Räikkönen in the hairpin for 5th. Verstappen would start pressuring Hamilton for 3rd, but would lose patience, and he'd run wide off the track. Max Verstappen losing patience, I know, what a shock. His teammate Ricciardo would easily pick up that spot from him. And then on lap 40, Ricciardo does what his young teammate could not do, and he passes Hamilton for 3rd in the hairpin. 2 laps later, he passed Vettel with DRS for 2nd, but the very next lap, Max Verstappen would drive to the inside of Vettel into the hairpin, and both of those cars would spin out Verstappen just being a little too aggressive and greedy in that moment, and it would cost both of the drivers. Verstappen, he would be issued a 10-second time penalty at the end of the race, but with 11 laps to go, Ricciardo would finally take the lead from Bottas and hold on to win the Chinese Grand Prix. And what was just a surprising and fantastic race, and Red Bull now has a victory this season when Mercedes does not. And who would have thought that Red Bull would get a win before Mercedes? Who would have thought that? I wouldn't have thought that. But on the podium, it would be Daniel Ricciardo for Red Bull, Valtteri Bottas for Mercedes, and Kimi Räikkönen. The rest of the top 10, though, would look like this. Lewis Hamilton would finish 4th after Verstappen's time penalty. Verstappen would end up 5th because of that penalty. Hülkenberg would be 6th. Fernando Alonso would finish 7th with another great run for McLaren. Pole sitter and championship leader Sebastian Vettel would fall to 8th after that little incident with Max Verstappen. Carlos Sainz would finish 9th, and Kevin Magnussen for Haas would finish in 10th. 3 rounds into the World Championship, and Vettel is still out front and taking names, but after his 8th place, Hamilton is just 9 points behind in 2nd. Bottas is 3rd, 14 points behind, and Ricciardo moves up to 4th with that win, 17 points behind. Mercedes leads the Constructors' Championship just 1 point over Ferrari. That is how close this fight is at the front. Great stuff. Could be in for one of the most exciting seasons in Formula One history. I mean, who knows? This is close stuff, and it's something we definitely haven't seen in quite some time. Red Bull is in 3rd, McLaren is 4th with 28 points to their name, which is much better than last year, as you know. Renault is 5th, Toro Rosso is 6th, and Haas is 7th, 1 point behind Toro Rosso. So that's a good little mid-pack battle going on there between those two teams. Sauber is 8th, Force India 9th, and Williams is bringing up the rear in 10th. No points scored this season, and that is quite odd for that team, so they need to turn it around and turn it around quick. The next race will be April 29th from one of my personal favorite tracks, the street circuit of Azerbaijan and Baku. That race always produces some excitement, and I can't wait to take this fight to the streets. And speaking of the streets, both the IMSA WeatherTech Series and the IndyCar Series shared the day from the Long Beach Street Circuit, one of the toughest street circuits in the world, Monaco being the toughest, obviously. But for the last 3 years, Wayne Taylor Racing had won the Long Beach race for Cadillac. But now that the Taylor brothers were split up on different teams, which Taylor would win the race? Well, for the 4th straight year in a row, Cadillac would win at Long Beach, but it wasn't the one you were probably expecting. The win would go to Yoel Barbosa and Felipe Albuquerque of Mustang Sampling Racing, the same team that opened the 2018 season with the win at the 24 Hours of Daytona. This was the first time either driver had won at Long Beach, and now that this team has 2 wins in the books after 3 events, well, they are the current points leaders in the prototype class. Albuquerque took over the lead of the race after a very good pit stop by the team with 40 minutes to go. Before that, the number 31 of Felipe Nasser and the Team Penske number 6 of Juan Pablo Montoya had been sharing the lead. The number 2 Tequila Patron ESM Nissan would finish 2nd, 4 seconds behind the winning car. And that was a much needed run for Ryan DeZiel and Scott Sharp. Until that 2nd place finish, their best finish this season had been 16th. But even though neither Taylors would win the race, Wayne Taylor Racing was able to put the number 10 Cadillac on the podium with a 3rd place finish. Mazda would have another successful run and bring their car home in 4th, so I still feel like they're going to get a win this season. And both Penske cars would finish 5th and 6th. Penske still not able to close the deal at the end of the race. They run so strong at the start of the race, they just can't seem to get the finish that they need. In GTLM, Long Beach continues to be a great track for Corvette, specifically that number 4 Corvette that would once again take the win with Oliver Gavin and Tommy Milner behind the wheel. That win would be the 2nd consecutive win at Long Beach and the 1st win of 2018, but the 107th win for the Corvette racing program in their history. Bravo to Corvette. With 23 minutes left in the race, Milner took the lead from the Porsche 911 driver Earl Bamber, who suffered a suspension failure, and for the last 23 minutes, Tommy Milner drove to a victory, 2 seconds over both Ford GTs. Ryan Briscoe and Richard Westbrook would finish 2nd in the number 67 Ford GT to keep their lead in the points. With 8 races left in the championship, they hold a 9-point lead over the number 4 Corvette, but it would be the 48th career win for Oliver Gavin, and that ties him for 6th on the most IMSA wins with another Corvette driver. You may remember this guy, Johnny O'Connell. On Sunday afternoon, though, it was time to go IndyCar racing. Alexander Rossi grew up watching IndyCar racing at Long Beach as a kid, and he probably never imagined that he'd ever get to race on that same course, but he would sit on the pole and dominate the race to win his first of 2018, and he now sits atop of the championship standings. There was some drama at the start of the race. Will Power, he did not get off to a good start, but he was able to just hang on to second. Meanwhile, on the outside, Graham Rahal nudged Simon Pagenaud and put the Penske driver into the wall. Rahal was given a drive-through penalty for that action. Also, Ryan Hunter-Reay, he clipped Scott Dixon's tire, and that messed up the front wing on Hunter-Reay's car. So Ryan Hunter-Reay was forced to make a pit stop for repairs to get that nose fixed. But he could move up the order when the other cars started making pit stops, and by lap 17, Hunter-Reay was back to 8th, but still 20 seconds behind the race leader, Alexander Rossi. Now, when Rossi finally pitted on lap 25, he had a 3-second lead over the rest of the field, and when everything cycled back around after the pit stops, Rossi was back in the lead with an 8-second gap back to Scott Dixon in second. Newgarden was third and Will Power was fourth, but it was Sebastian Bourdais who made a charge from fifth, and he was up to third by lap 38. At the halfway point, though, Scott Dixon had shaved Rossi's lead from 8 seconds to 4, but then the caution would come out, and all that distance got erased at that point. Tony Kanaan gave up fifth to hit the pits, and he would rejoin the race in 10th. The race restarted with Alexander Rossi in the lead, of course. Hunter-Reay, who had been rebounding from his troubles early on in the race, he would have more drama, though, when he struck Sato and got a flat tire. Hunter-Reay would be forced to pit, and that would send him all the way back to 19th. The caution would wave again around lap 60. Bordeaux and Dixon would both hit pit road for service, but race control told those teams that they actually came into the pits when those pits were closed. Neither Bourdais or Scott Dixon knew that the pits were closed. Bourdais drove on through, but Dixon decided, well, what the hell, we'll go ahead and make a stop anyway. With 17 laps to go, Rossi led Scott Dixon and Will Power to the green. However, Scott Dixon was going to have to make a drive-through for pitting too early. That would give Will Power second, and Will Power would chase Rossi all the way to the finish, but he could not make the pass. Alexander Rossi would pick up the win. For Andretti Autosport, Rossi now adds Long Beach to his growing resume of wins that also includes the Indy 500. Rossi is the guy to watch for the championship for sure. Will Power would finish second for Team Penske. Ed Jones would finish third for Chip Ganassi Racing. Rossi's teammate Zach Veach would finish fourth. Graham Rahal would finish fifth. Marco Andretti would finish sixth. And last week's winner and defending series champion Joseph Newgarden would finish 7th. Scott Dixon would end up 11th after serving his penalty. And Sebastian Bourdais, who ran well during the race but wouldn't get the finish he wanted, he would finish 14th. But Alexander Rossi now leads Newgarden by 23 points. But there is still a lot of racing to go in the IndyCar series. And then finally, that brings us to the Monster Energy Cup race from Bristol. Short track racing this weekend. And with the bottom groove back in the mix, the bump and run was in full effect. And I personally started to dislike Bristol races. That used to be one of my favorite races on the calendar, but as of late, it has been one of my least favorites. It became more of like a conveyor belt to me when the top groove was the only groove that you could really use. It was like watching a conveyor belt of cars go around. And I just believe they had killed the racetrack and the racing a little bit, but on Sunday, you could tell in that first run, Bristol was indeed back. Kyle Busch, he was picking up where he left off in Texas with the pole position. In fact, both of the Busch boys would be out front on the front row, with older brother Kurt qualifying second. Green flag would be in the air, and pretty much instantly there was a big crash that would involve guys like Chase Elliott and Martin Truex Jr., some big contenders taken out in that first one. And Martin Truex Jr. for the second week in a row would have bad luck in a tore-up race car. But early in stage one, it was clear that Ryan Blaney and Team Penske were the guys to beat. Blaney would go up and take first from Busch, and by the end of the stage, you had Brad Keselowski in second, Joey Logano in third, and the Penske affiliation car of Paul Menard in fourth. But as Blaney was looking like he was going to get the stage 1 win, Trevor Bayne and Chris Buescher would tangle and cause a pileup, and that would collect race leader Ryan Blaney. And my dad knows I'm a Ryan Blaney fan, so he actually bought me a new hat. But it didn't give Blaney much luck yesterday, and he'd be out of the race just a few laps away from winning the first stage, so that win would go to Brad Keselowski in second at the time. Off and on, though, it would rain, and finally in the middle of stage 2, NASCAR would bring the cars down pit road and call the race until Monday, and Kyle Larson would have the lead at the red flag, so he would lead them all through the night into the green flag the next day. And well, that's where we last left it and picked it up this afternoon. When the green flag was back in the air, Kyle Larson would continue to lead the race until he would get wrapped up in lap traffic. He'd get wrapped up in that traffic and he'd lose the lead to Brad Keselowski, who would go on to win stage 2. But Jimmy Johnson would be starting stage 3 from the second position, and for the first time this season, Jimmy Johnson was starting to show some pace. And that's not something we're used to seeing from him, but he was starting to look like his old self at Bristol, and over the last few weeks, he's been getting better and better. In fact, he was having a really good race at Texas until he was involved in a crash, and none of that was of his own doing, so that 48 team is starting to get a little better each week. Brad Keselowski would lead the field to the green to begin stage 3. Keselowski wouldn't get a great start, and he and Denny Hamlin and Johnson would race very hard for the lead, but Denny Hamlin would have to pull off the track and hit the pits for a loose wheel, so that would take him out of the mix. Keselowski would start to lead, though, and he would start to pull away while arguably his biggest rival in NASCAR, Kyle Busch, was chasing him. And it was some great racing that just makes you want to cry, because it's the kind of thing that we have been missing at Bristol. But Keselowski, Busch, and Larson, they were running hard for the lead of this race, but it would be Larson that would take the lead. But again, like Ryan Blaney early in the race, Ryan Newman would spin, and he would collect the leader Larson and bring out the 10th caution of the race. And I can almost hear Jerry Seinfeld right now, Newman, when it came to that. But it was just bad luck for the guys in the lead today. But luckily, Larson didn't have too much damage. It wasn't like Blaney's car that was completely destroyed. Larson was able to continue on. Larson didn't say anything about that crash on the radio, but his crew chief did say that Newman was an idiot. So Kyle Busch would lead them back to the green with 172 laps to go. Busch would lead to lap 373 when Reed Sorensen, and I bet you almost expect me to say spins and collects Kyle Busch with the way the rest of the race has gone, but that didn't happen. Sorensen would spin on his own, and that would bring out the 11th caution. The leaders came down pit road, but Daniel Suarez was called off of pit road and told to stay out. That would give Suarez the lead of the race, and that was some strategy at play there. There was a big rain cloud heading towards the track. And remember, after stage 2, the race is official, but the 19 team started doing a little rain dance there, hoping the race would end and give them the win, but the rain would stay away, and with 137 to go, Suarez would lead the field to the green on older tires, and he would have the lead for like one lap before Keselowski would reclaim the lead again. And get this, behind him, Bubba Wallace started fighting Keselowski for the lead in that number 43 STP car. And with 125 laps to go, Bubba Wallace would go up and snag the lead in the legendary 43. And Bubba Wallace would get the lead his first ever laps in the Monster Energy Cup Series. But a few short laps later, Kyle Busch would get past him and put a damper on his parade. And then the caution would come out again for weather. But I tell you what, and I know I've said it a few times already in this recap, but that was some damn good racing. Multiple lead changes among multiple drivers in those runs. And I mean, Bubba Wallace got out front and led some laps for the first time in his career. And it was side-by-side racing. And I was loving every minute of it. And Martinsville was a really good race too this season, which leads me to think that we either need more short tracks on the calendar, or we just simply need to start running races on Monday, because Martinsville was run on a Monday and it was pretty good as well. 100 laps to go though. Kyle Busch would lead them to the green over Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Larson, Ryan Newman, and Bubba Wallace. But rain was coming and the drivers knew it, so they were making a mad dash for what could be the potential win. With 58 laps to go, Kyle Larson would get the lead from Kyle Busch. But when everyone stayed out, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he went into the pits and he got fresh tires. And he was using those fresh tires to charge up through the field, and he took second from Kyle Busch. But that 6-second lead that Kyle Larson had over Stenhouse was erased when Brad Keselowski would hit the wall after winning both of the opening stages. That would bring out the caution. And now this final pit stop was going to be the money stop. Kyle Larson would remain the leader after that round of pit stops. Kyle Busch would be second, Jimmy Johnson third. But the big loser on the exchange of stops would be Stenhouse Jr., who would fall to fourth. But when they went back to the green with 22 laps to go, Stenhouse Jr., man, he gave it everything he had. He was charging towards the front. He even put the bumper to Larson at one point, but Larson could hang on. But with 6 laps to go, Kyle Busch punted Larson out of the way to take the lead, and Kyle Busch would win at Bristol, picking up his second win of the season. And man, what a finish that was. That was a classic Bristol finish of bump and run. The bump and run is back, baby. Kyle Busch just went up there. Larson made a slight mistake, slid up the racetrack a little bit, and Kyle Busch put that bumper there to take his Skittles machine for his 7th career win at Bristol. And I believe that finish was worth waiting until the next day to see. What a shame for Stenhouse Jr., though. He had the race stayed green to the finish. Who knows what he might have been able to do. Stenhouse, he had the fresher tires than the leaders, and he might have actually caught and passed Larson for the win. But let's take a look at the top 20 finishers from the Food City 500. Kyle Busch would pick up his 2nd win in a row and his 2nd win of 2018. He started from the pole, ran top 5 most of the race, and put the Bristol bump and run to Kyle Larson to win. Kyle Larson would end up 2nd after leading the most laps of the race, but he was just a tick loose during that final run. But he continues to be the strongest Chevy, and it won't be long before he gets his first win of the season for sure. Jimmy Johnson would have his best race of 2018, 7-time would finish 3rd for Hendrick Motorsports. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. would finish 4th. Alex Bowman would have a great run, finishing 5th. So 2 Hendrick cars in the top 5. That's the first time we've seen that this season. Stewart Haas didn't have the best race, but they certainly were able to get the finishes at the end. Eric Almirola would finish 6th. Kevin Harvick would finish 7th. And Clint Boyer would finish 8th to put 3 Stewart Haas cars in the top 10, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Not too shabby. Penske started out strong, but it would be Joey Logano who would finish the best for Team Penske. He would finish 9th, and Ryan Newman would finish 10th. Daniel Suarez would be 11th. David Reagan, with a great run today, would finish 12th. Paul Menard would end up 13th. Denny Hamlin 14th. He just can't seem to get some luck to come his way. Austin Dillon would end up 15th. Bubba Wallace Jr., who led some laps today, would finish 16th. AJ Allmendinger would finish 17th. Young William Byron would finish 18th. Jamie McMurray would be 19th. And Landon Castle would finish 20th. That's the top 20 finishers of the Food City 500. But I feel like Bristol is back. Bristol of old is finally back. We saw bumping, we saw crashes, we saw hard racing, lead changes, and with the added weather, we saw a little bit of everything, didn't we? But I'm ready for this weather to start getting a little better for these races. More sunshine is needed for these races going forward, so hopefully we can get some better weather for the races coming up in the calendar. This Saturday night, though, we're going short track racing again under the lights from Richmond, so this fight will have to be continued until another short track this weekend. And can Kyle Busch be the next Harvick and win 3 in a row this year? At least he's not finishing second anymore, right? But busy weekend of racing. I hope you enjoyed it all. There was so much to watch. That was had to be over 1,000 miles of racing that I watched this weekend. I'm Justin with NRN, and this has been the recap. Please follow us on social media if you want to stay up to date on everything racing. You can follow us on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and search for the No Bull Racing Network, NRN. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at No Bull Racing Net. We'd love to have you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you after Richmond next weekend. Take it easy, everyone.